calling you out, Virtual Horror Con. You and me, cage match. It's gonna go down. Today we are going to be talking about wrestling, and I'm very excited about this panel. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming and watching. This is Virtual Horror Con. I am Mark, also known as March, also known as Marchosius, from Gehenna Gaming. This one we're going to mark out, and we're going to talk about some wrestling, but I've got some amazing people with me today to do just that. So I'm just going to go down the line. If you want to add a little bit more about yourself, go right ahead. But first, we're starting with my good friend, brother Wesley Franks from Carry It Comfort Studios. He's a writer, a professional mark, a gameplay tester, a content developer. I heard that he was a backyard wrestler as well.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It's the beast from the southeast, the man with the plan with the territories in his hands. Brother Wesley coming to you live from Virtual Horror Con, the panel of the immortals. Here, the showcases of showcases. Are you ready? Can you dig it? Do you smell what I'm doing?
I mean, you got a pop for that one. That was good.
That was good. That was legit.
Then we have Nathan D. Paoletta from NPD Designs. That's right, the writer and creator of Worldwide Wrestling, which I've been geeking out over the past couple of weeks for, which just started their Kickstarter for the second edition. I'm very, very pumped about.
Oh,
He
yeah.
is an award-winning independent game designer, a publisher, a graphic artist. He's worked, his works include Annalise, Imp of the Perverse, and of course, Worldwide Wrestling, as I just mentioned. Nathan.
Hello. How can I follow that up?
I know, right?
I got nothing.
Tough.
I will say a pro tip, as a friend of mine says, I just call it wub wub wub. It's just easier to say.
Nice.
I like that. You know, it's like when people say WWE, who have been working there for a long time, they say dubba da dubba da.
Yeah. Or as the rest of us say, the E.
The E.
The E. But
The
yes,
E.
thank you so much. Happy to be here. Yeah, excited to learn from all of these other panelists more than anything else.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And of course, we have the greatest, Allie Bustion from Mad Perio Games. She's an artist, an amazing artist, by the way. Illustrator, game and narrative designer, community manager, and a writer. Some of the works that you worked on, Heist, Be Misbehaving, Parliament of Supplements. There's a whole bunch of stuff I'm super, super excited about. I think that you have coming down the pike that I'm hearing rumors of, which I'm super excited about. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, there's several things that I can't talk about for a couple of months, but it's fine. It's all right.
I tried to squeeze it out of you. I tried to maybe sneak it out.
I'm very afraid of the people that would be mad. So I'm gonna just keep my mouth shut.
I'm going to add to that list that also, not only are you an artist and illustrator, game and narrative designer, community manager and writer, but also a professional.
I mean, I hope I'm a professional. I mean, I paid a lot of money for a degree and like they told me that would be enough, but then it wasn't. So now I'm just here on this panel on Twitch talking about wrestling.
And then we have our good friend, Eddy Webb of Pugsteady, the man, the myth, the legend, the writer, the narrative designer, the game developer, the consultant for video games and RPGs, the works that he has touched over the years: World of Darkness, V5, Chicago by Night, Pugmire, Futurama, Firefly, Red Dwarf, Sherlock Holmes. You were a writer on the NWE supplement for Trinity Continuum Aberrant, which has not been released yet.
No, and actually, I forgot to mention this when we were talking earlier. I also worked on the official WWE tabletop role-playing game, Know Your Role, that 10 years ago.
What?
Back when the D20 boom happened, and they're like, we need a D20 wrestling game, but the WWE, it's like, okay. So we wrote for that.
That's
okay.
So, oh my, I was so excited. Somebody posted on Twitter screenshots of like I think like either the rules, the first couple of pages, like the legal pages of it, or there was like a private conversation on Twitter that people were having about it. And you wrote on this one. I thought it was unauthorized.
Yes. Oh, and I have stories about working with WWE legal on that. Let me tell you.
Oh, I bet. I live in Connecticut, so yeah, that's a company that I regularly apply to, and I know a lot of people who have worked for and have heard some stories. So I'm sure you have some as well. And then, of course, we have Grasheriza, one of my favorite people of all time. We actually were, the first time I met you was when we played the very first, I believe it was a cross-table merging event.
Cross Chronicle, yeah, between two different V5, in the V5 shared BTM world.
Correct. And that was the very first big, I mean, ish at the time, Gehenna Gaming event. So he is a technical designer, a programmer. He's currently a professional and AGGP program coordinator at NHTI. There's a lot of abbreviations there. I don't know what half of those mean. Maybe you can explain it.
So basically, I'm a professor of game development, and I'm the program coordinator. Basically, I'm in charge of the group.
Hell yeah.
So
That's
previously to NHTI, I worked in the industry. I worked at Activision. I worked on Marvel Alliance. Before that, I worked on a couple WB games.
Batman Begins mobile. I mean,
mobile Catman.
Just that little game.
Yeah. I also worked on the Catwoman mobile game, and that's an interesting story. But yeah, no. But the reason I'm on the panel is that in between all that, for a while I was working for WrestleView as one of their recappers, simply for NXT.
And from what I understand, you were doing it like before they started to really push NXT. When it was really moved developmental brand, you were doing like reviews and recaps for NXT kind of in the earlier days.
This was just I decided when they made the shift to Full Sail, I felt like that was a good place for me to pull out as a recapper at that time, and to let someone else take over. But yeah, no, for me, I'm in this wacky game show era in the arenas. We've got elimination points and saves, and then it got into the greatest match of all time, Yoshitachu versus oh crap, I'm blanking who it is, but it's basically action figure on a pole match.
Yeah. I mean, I've got some serious talent on this panel here. I'm severely outranked. I am, I guess, a smark is what you would call me. I am a huge old school WWF fan. I do like WWE. I convinced and perhaps some say manipulated my 5-year-old daughter to really be into WWE. So now that's all she wants to watch. I'm a huge fan of AEW. But yeah, I'm just a mark, and I like marking out with other people. So it is a pleasure and humbling to have all of you on this panel. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
No problem.
Okay, let's start it off. I want to set the squared circle, okay? I want to talk about the elephant in the room. I want to talk about the difference between professional wrestling and professional wrestling. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I actually don't know what you're talking about.
Actually, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Pro wrestling, as in Greco-Roman professional wrestling.
Okay.
So as the actual Olympic sport.
Correct.
Okay.
And then the respectable sports entertainment, which I respect far more than Greco-Roman wrestling.
So Olympic wrestling versus the king of sports, professional wrestling.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
how I would phrase that difference.
The king of sports. I love it. So let's talk about there's some major differences. There's some major similarities. You hear a lot about wrestling isn't real from people who don't watch wrestling, as if we didn't know. But what are some of the major differences that you found that are important to make a distinction on?
Actually, when I think I very first started watching wrestling is like a little kid on, God, it might have been on like Fox or something. My mom called it a soap opera with muscles. And that's how I thought about it for a really, really long time. And this was in like the 90s. So that whole era of wrestling.
Attitude era?
Like late Attitude era, starting to go into like the PG era.
Yep.
Which is when I stopped watching.
Kind of the end of the Divas kind of stuff. And
when the Divas were it was a whole time, but it was also like when you had Trish and Lita wrestling.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But like calling it a soap opera with muscles did a lot of framing that no one has really destroyed yet. Because like, yeah, soap operas can be cheesy and everything, but you can also have this like nice undercurrent of story with whatever is happening. And
Yeah.
like that's how I've always thought of wrestling. So
Yeah,
like,
and I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the soap opera analogy is actually really, really good because both of them start from a place of what seems like perfectly normal situations, but they build up their own inherent logic that doesn't map to real world logic, but it still is internally consistent. Like, you know, everyone in soap opera knows every other character in soap opera. That's just natural, no matter how big or small the setting is. Everyone in that character knows each other. They have a relationship with them, might be good or it's bad, and it's going to constantly change. It's going to constantly evolve. Whereas with wrestling, you know, it's set up like a sport, but you know, it's a sport where legal disputes are handled by wrestling matches because that's a perfectly normal thing to have happen. It's a situation where a person who's an Olympic wrestler can also wrestle someone who's literally undead. You know, but inside the squared circle, as it were, it still has that whole kind of internal logic in the same way that you don't really end up accidentally brainwashed and sleeping with your twin brother. You know, I mean, it's same thing. Soap operas don't make sense if you think about them too hard, but inside their own narrative structure, they internally logistically sound.
I'm also gonna, you know, right now we're living in kind of a golden era of television. You know, all the best writers for that type of media, in my opinion, are probably writing for television instead of writing for movies, like they used to. There was a kind of a tectonic shift between those two worlds. So now we're kind of in the age of like serialized TV series, and there was something about that wrestling has always kind of had this ongoing like storylines always kind of evolving. You can kind of, it's not really self-contained. You can pick it up, I guess, at any point. You don't really, there's really no beginning or end. It's just evolutions. But the storylines are can be super complex or super simple, emotional or funny. And I feel like it's we're living in this age now where television kind of has those same kind of qualities that wrestling always had.
I mean, in that regards, wrestling is very much like comic books, where they just keep going and going. You know, the long-going comic books. There are points where there are jumping on. So, for example, last year we had a jumping on point when SmackDown moved to Fox. That was obviously a point where if you were new, you could get going and get started. So that, you know, AEW had their show, another jumping on point for people. So there are points as things go on where we're going to get those jumping on points. But the thing, I think, going back to the bigger question, when we look at professional wrestling, it has more in common with Greek theater than it does with Greco-Roman wrestling in that regards. And when you look at Greek theater, they were basically these large scale plays done in an amphitheater. And what is wrestling? Stories done in an arena. I mean, it is a modern amphitheater brought to life in its own way. I always found that analogy very interesting. Wrestling, and that brings us back to like, yeah, wrestling, it's not real. But then again, Game of Thrones is not real. So I'm urging people who, when you get like wrestling not real, throw it right back at them. Tell them, Arrow is not real. Flash is not real. Law and Order is not real. Maybe based on real things, but it's still not real. So I mean, this is one of those old issues. Wrestling not real. It's time that we started throwing that back.
It seems to me that a lot of popular culture has caught up to where wrestling has been in some of these aspects, right? Like with these like on like these continuously unrolling storylines that you can kind of jump into or jump out of. The notion of like, I'm going to accept that the thing that I am watching has its own internal constructed reality, and that doesn't mean that I'm dumb, right? Like that whole shift that's happened in popular culture, I think, with like the rise of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all that stuff, that's kind of I think that has a lot to do with why wrestling has been in a, with some variation, but has been in kind of a boom cycle in a lot of ways in the last, I don't know, decade and a half. So I think that it's not so much that people are telling me, oh, that's fake, right? Because I have never had that conversation. No one has ever legitimately, like, as a not trying to,
In good
not
faith,
being
though.
a nerd about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, been like, hey, that's fake, right? But it's more like, whoa, what is this thing? Like, how do I get into this? How do I map the things that I know I like in other media into wrestling to find my entry point? And I think that's been super interesting to see over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so.
Yeah, I think so too. It's a really interesting time too, because we're living, especially with the influx of comic book adaptations, the massive popularity of now tabletop gaming. When everybody's a nerd, nobody's a nerd, and being a wrestling fan is not really doesn't really have the stigma that it used to. There are people. Are there people who are like hiding the fact that they like wrestling less now than they used to, and it's really not that big of a deal. I mean, it's WWE is a multi-million-dollar organization, global organization that's publicly shared. So we're living that time. Speaking of promotions, what's your favorite promotion? There's a whole bunch of them, from the majors to the indies. NXT, Eddy?
Yeah, honestly, right now, I personally feel like NXT is one of the stronger. Okay, not this exact month because everything's crazy right now, but in general, they consistently put on high quality matches. They have good storytelling, like the Tommaso Ciampa, Johnny Gargano feud has been going on for literally 2.5 years now, and it continues to be an amazing story. So I personally feel like NXT is one of the strongest brands out there right now.
I'd have to say, personally, with my own taste, just because there was a point getting towards the end of the Ruthless Aggression era with WWE, I fell off of WWE, and I found NJPW, New Japan, because it was there for me when I was like, I don't even need to worry about like people doing I Quit matches and like outer ring drama and everything like that. Everything was within the ring. Like, you have a wrestler that like is apparently, according to him, the embodiment of a dragon. He is a dragon trapped in a human body. That's the kind of ridiculous I need. And also like the amount of athleticism that comes with that. And I think like at that point, I had such a love of that. So for right now, AEW is the closest thing to that, especially with NJPW being like off the air for a while all this is going on. I think AEW, when they started, it really brought NJPW to American household. That kind of style of wrestling where it is ridiculous, where like you have these stables, you have a cult building inside of this wrestling promotion. You've got for hire, not killers, but wrestlers that are called the Butcher, the Blade, and Bunny for some reason. But they don't kill people; they just wrestle people and beat them for money or lose to them. It's that kind of outlandishness. But WWE, especially with NXT, I'd have to agree with Eddy. They've turned that brand back towards me to where I watch that as well. But I have to say AEW right now is probably my personal favorite.
Allie, which one is your favorite? I know it's tough.
Yeah, like I really love lucha in general.
Yeah.
So
Same.
like being able to occasionally just like watch lucha on Twitch is really nice.
Yeah.
Because it is like that big over the top bombastic like style of wrestling. And like there can be a lot of flips, and my cat is crying outside the door, but it's fine.
That's okay, we can't hear her.
All right. But like I think it's NXT, like for the all around most well-rounded, because like what I'm there for is story.
Yeah.
So like NXT develops and paces, especially. It paces their stories really well. Like when the stories are really good, they're just like so nicely timed out. And like when I came back to wrestling, it was watching Sasha versus Bailey. So like,
yes,
yeah.
And bad wrestling can be peppered, improved, or highlighted well with a good story, or someone who's really good on the mic. I mean, there's so many people that are amazing on the mic, but are just not the best wrestlers. Some that'll barely wrestle, and they'll spend most of their time on the mic, and that's the mic work I really dig. That's one of the things that I like about WWE is the fact that they really highlight the importance of that kind of mic work. Not a fan of the scripting so much, but being able to cut a promo is a big deal for me.
Speaking of lucha, though, quick sideway. Shout out to the late lamented Lucha Underground.
Yeah.
That was an
Yeah.
amazing show, and it's gone far too soon.
Far too soon. Far too
Although I believe, isn't there a belt in AEW that is from Lucha Underground?
Is there?
I believe so. I'll have to check my
I'll
sources
look
on
into that. It's cool.
soon.
Yeah,
That is actually really cool.
yeah. There was,
Is it the one that Kenny Omega's holding right now?
no, I think it's from New Japan. No, it is. Yes, it is. It is that one.
The Primetime
The
Championship? or something?
Primetime Championship. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I wonder if they're gonna fold in a lot of wrestlers from Lucha Underground.
I hope so, because I'm a big fan of that rope work.
Yes. Yes.
So okay, your Mount Rushmore of wrestling. 4 faces. Who do we got?
Grash
I know.
is-
Yeah,
It's
for
tough.
me, it's kind of easy. I'd probably go with. You see, I'm a WWE guy, so it's it'd be Hogan, Flair, Austin, Cena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know,
I might
Yeah.
be the only
So
one that,
and if
like,
and yeah, I mean those are the 4 big ones. I mean Rock just gets edged out by a little bit, unfortunately. But those are the big 4 in terms of work and importance.
You almost want like 5 or 6 on that mountain.
Yeah.
yeah.
Throw Undertaker on there. I mean,
That's
Jericho.
I mean it's the lumberjack on the mountain. Lumberjacks on the mountain. So
Jake the Snake.
That's,
yeah, I mean
Would he make it on there? Would Jake the Snake make it on there?
I think for me, mine always changes. You could ask me last week, and I would have Randy Savage on there with Lita and Mark Henry. I think the only one that's always constantly on my Mount Rushmore is Eddie Guerrero. Latino Heat was and is always my favorite.
Didn't he wrestle? He wrestled on New Japan, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
He did way back in the day, along with like Chris Jericho and everybody. Yeah, but he was always a phenomenal like worker. And when he got his push, I always remember those matches. His match against Brock Lesnar always sticks with me. Also, his match with Kurt Angle as well, are just like the amount of work that he put in. And I mean, but Lita is probably an all-time favorite. Randy Savage,
China.
China, like D-Generation X wouldn't have been the same without her.
Oh my God, no.
Yeah.
She was fantastic. And what a shame. So many wrestlers died at a young age, not to bring it down, but they do. And it sucks when that happens. And oftentimes we lose living legends. Speaking of scary things though, what is your most scary or most frightening gimmick or angle from any wrestler? All time, whatever. Even if you're a kid, it's like it scared me when I was a kid, but now it doesn't. For example, I used to be afraid of the Brood.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then I started playing Vampire the Masquerade, and I was no longer afraid of the Brood.
For me, like in terms of actually feeling some kind of the emotion of horror while I'm watching wrestling, as opposed to like appreciating some kind of like constructed like spooky wrestling. It's mostly when I'm worried that people are going to hurt themselves. That's really that's the true horror for me. Like when Daniel Bryan came back, for example, in his first couple matches after he was cleared to come back, and it was like they weren't. He was like, I think he was something, just kind of like easing back in, and it's not like they were high impact, high profile matches or anything, but just like sitting there the whole time being like, please don't hurt yourself, please don't hurt yourself, like protect your neck, please. That is definitely when I like actually feel like visceral, like tensing up, I really hope this person doesn't hurt themselves, which sometimes takes you out of the match and sometimes is played for effect, right? Like, and I think Daniel Bryan in particular is really good at that, using those, like, I know people are going to be worried about me, so I will work that into my move set, which is
even some of like pretty much all of Mankind's matches.
I wasn't watching during that time. I came to wrestling pretty late, actually, like post Attitude Era, so that's all kind of historical to me, but definitely Mankind as like spooky characters, Mankind's probably my standout. Undertaker obviously looms large, but in terms of ones that I appreciate their whole body of work, I think Mankind definitely stands out. And also honorable mention, not necessarily for any particular like storylines or anything, but the like old Territory era, Kevin Sullivan, Prince of Darkness, his little crew, and the summoning the purple haze out of the sea and that kind of stuff, and Fallen Angel, all that stuff. I think at the time I would have been like all over that if I like lived in Florida and was alive in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, like, I kind of wish that I was just a little bit older just to watch some of that older wrestling. Just because I started watching kind of, I don't know, mid to late 90s. But speaking of you know, kind of gimmicky, scary gimmicks, Brandy Rhodes' kind of voodoo inspired gimmick on AEW, that's very, very short lived, and they just put the kibosh on it out of the blue. I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but basically, if you're not watchers of AEW, she would kind of come out with Kong, the other wrestler,
Awesome Kong.
Awesome Kong. Oh my God,
The Nightmare Family.
Yeah, so she would come out, and a living legend herself, Awesome Kong, and would like wrestle somebody, take a piece of their hair, and then just leave. And she has all these really cool, like kind of spooky, kind of witchy promos that were very reminiscent of like Haitian voodoo and New Orleans voodoo. And I was very, very excited about it. Because I think that they were probably, hopefully, going to approach it respectfully and interestingly, but they just kind of cut it off before it could really collect anything.
It didn't get over with the audience as much because I think a lot of it was aimed towards the TV audience.
Yeah.
And so the in-ring audience, it didn't really get over with them. And it led to them even doing like the old CM Punk stuff with like bringing somebody in and shaving their head in the middle of the ring and like, you're part of the Nightmare Collective now. Like she had a whole thing going and they just cut it because people were more interested in the Dark Order stuff.
Right. But I think it's part of the reason why weirdly vampires continue to have a strong resonance in wrestling. I mean, obviously we talk about characters like Vampiro and whatnot, but you know, it goes back to even as far as like the 60s and maybe even the 50s. I'm a little fuzzy on that point. But because I mean, if you think about it, it's a very simple gimmick to play. It doesn't require a ton of costuming. Doesn't require a ton of makeup or just a little bit of body language. It gives you a pretty easy person to hate. And also when these vampire games started getting popular is right around the time of one of the bumps of like the Hammer horror style vampire interest. So there's an interesting parallel of when vampires in pop culture are just about to wane is when they start to wax in wrestling, if you actually track it a little bit. So it's like, you know,
part of
the vampire elements of like the Brood and whatnot started really hitting really right before Vampire the Masquerade started taking off. And they kind of rode that wave. And then vampires died a little bit post Twilight, but then there was vampire gimmicks like ECW and the like in the 2000s. So there's an interesting kind of inverse sine wave effect between vampires in wrestling and vampires in pop culture.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Nathan, I think you had a point on that too.
Yeah, wrestling historically has been about 10 years behind mass culture, right? With lots of things like picking up on trends and bringing that into wrestling as a gimmick, and it's kind of like, weren't we thinking about like, you know, that reference is like 5 years old. Thanks for bringing it up now. But I think it does create this kind of, I like that, this kind of inverse sine wave of where stuff will happen in wrestling a little out of sync of when it's happening in mass culture. And so sometimes it feeds back into it, right? And that's pretty cool. I was going to say kind of similarly, like the thing with specifically, I know him from Japan, but I think he was also in the States. There was like a Leatherface wrestler, right? Who's like doing like death matches with chainsaws and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
In the 90s.
Yeah.
And there's been other like horror gimmicks, kind of like, yeah, like your Leatherface, your like Pinhead, like kind of the big like movie monsters. And it's like buy a mask at the costume store, you know, wear that in the ring, and the rest is all, like Eddie was saying, body language and the storytelling of like how this character is, you know, in the wrestling world.
That's big in like Southern hardcore wrestling.
Yeah.
You know, where someone even down to, and I don't know, I find it more creepy when they take like a cut a couple of holes in a pillowcase and throw it over their head with some rope or something, and wrestle kind of backyard style in a hardcore match with barbed wire instead of ropes, as opposed to like something like Bray Wyatt, which is a very expensive, well-produced mask, and could easily fit in its own movie. But yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like there's an interplay between horror and wrestling, and what scares us in a horror movie as opposed to what scares us in wrestling might be slightly different. So I want to talk about how pro wrestling and tabletop role playing also kind of have this interplay with each other, and they both have received similar backlash with religious extremists, sometimes around the same time, sometimes maybe beveled, but ultimately it kind of leads to demonization of fans, but also unification of people that like both of these hobbies. I want to know what your personal experience is involving this kind of adversity, whether it be in tabletop gaming or in wrestling or in both.
I'd say when I first grew up, it was very easy, because my dad got me into wrestling at a young age. I was 3 years old and he got me into wrestling. So wrestling more so was more applicable and like easy to bring up. But tabletop gaming, on the other hand, was not very. As I got older and as things started developing in wrestling, my mother stepped in and was like, wrestling is not good for you to watch. It's not healthy. It's not wholesome. And Dungeons and Dragons is no go. Like my parent, my dad was more lenient, but my mom was like, Dungeons and Dragons, Harry Potter, professional wrestling. It's not forming you to be a well-rounded individual. And I would have to say that, like, at this point in time, she's wrong. I mean, a lot of my social skills were developed from a lot of those things. But yeah, there was a point where I was a young child growing up and these things were okay. And then I hit a certain level where I like early young adult, about to be a teenager. And then it was a moratorium. It was just like, nope, we're stopping this. So you can read comic books, you can listen to Nirvana, but you can't watch Kane and Undertaker duke it out, and you can't roll dice anymore. That was a tough time.
What a shame. What about the rest of you?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, for me, it's more recent, and it's because both wrestling and tabletop gaming have a lot of the same demographic, where it's very white and male. So I show up in my like the gay community t-shirt, or like my support wrestlers of color t-shirt, and some people will be like, you like wrestling, let's talk about it.
Hell yeah.
And some people will just be like, but do you really like wrestling? Do you even care? Have you ever watched a wrestling match? Have you ever heard of New Japan? Huh? I bet you have.
God.
You're throwing knowledge at them. Meanwhile, they're watching SmackDown every week, and that's about it.
No.
Or just like, because I don't like know like older wrestling, like past the Attitude Era, for me, everything gets really fuzzy because I wasn't watching it.
And let's be honest, it's gotten better, right? I mean, past the Attitude Era.
The ability to tell a story and knowing how to tell a story all around has grown over time, and people are better at conveying them with different types of media, et cetera, et cetera. And like the same thing will happen with tabletop gaming, where like I'll show up at a convention like looking really cute, got my nice outfit on, and people will be like, oh, so where's your boyfriend? It's like, I don't know, in California where he lives. I'm here to do my several panels. How about you?
Oh, you're not on any panels? Okay.
Yeah, it's like, all right, well, don't forget to buy one of my books. Bye. And it's just like that, like the fact that I have to take like a quiz with people sometimes is a lot, and it happens in either.
Yeah, it sucks. That kind of gatekeeping. It's not fun. I've also noticed, and this is prevalent, I've been noticing kind of more in like, if you go in the depths of Facebook and enter a wrestling forum, God help you. because it can get very much that culture, kind of no girls on the internet. If you're a person of color or if you're a female, you probably don't like wrestling as much as I do. That's a generalized statement that I just made, but it's something that is prevalent, obviously. And I think it's a culture that we should probably try to move forward from.
Agreed.
I think in tabletop gaming, it's happening a little bit more like faster, quicker than wrestling. But we'll see.
It's actually, I kind of build on that point.
Yeah,
my
please.
wife was into tabletop role playing games and into wrestling before I was.
Yeah.
Like she played blue box D&D. She watched wrestling on like closed circuit television. So she's into both of these things, and I absolutely see it. It's like we'll go to a show and people will be like, "Oh, hey, so you're here to support your husband?" And she's like, "Fuck no, he's a noob. He can even calculate THACO. Screw him."
I would definitely say that the gatekeeping that's going on in all these different areas, the tabletop community has the least amount. And even among other game communities, it's even much less. So it's much more. I mean, we're much more accepting and friendly and helpful than other communities are. And it's just as you go out, there are these older communities of again, unfortunately, you've got like these segments that are just white dudes who just want to be white dudes, and thank you for being a white dude, unfortunately, who are clueless. And so while right now tabletop is having a renaissance, these other areas aren't, because they haven't brought in the people that require that renaissance to happen. So,
and this is one of the reasons why I'm a huge fan of AEW, because I think they are pushing that inclusion of, now granted, the women's division of AEW needs some serious work. However, the LGBTQ push that AEW has is freaking inspiring as hell. And Sunny Kiss
Yeah,
is amazing. And that alone, like just pushing that, and we're gonna have this promotion. It's not like old school, like back in the day with a few wrestlers. It was kind of like the joke, and it was extremely offensive. And not
Billy and Chuck, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we can go back to like to main era TNA, where it was a reason to make a character heel.
Right.
Yeah.
So and those days are long gone, and I think it's great that AEW is kind of pushing the culture for positivity and inclusion, and I think it's great.
It's so very interesting that the former Goldust is on AEW and is one of the tops of it, because when Dustin Rhodes was wrestling for WWE, Goldust was the butt of a lot of jokes for being feminine and for presenting as such, and for like kissing other male wrestlers and everything. And I think it's AEW is going to be very good for representation. As somebody that's part of the community as well, that's definitely one of the toughest parts of wrestling, but I can see it changing with AEW. I agree.
And one thing also, I don't think AEW gets enough credit for. I mean, it's great they're doing it, but also they're doing the disability representation. Particularly things like putting in policies so that people who get overstimulated by noise won't be freaked out during their events, or finding places they can have quiet rooms if need be to get out of those situations. That's huge in pro wrestling. That is a thing that just did not exist before. But it's just something in all the representation they're doing, they have a lot of visible representation now with people in the ring, but also some of their policies are actually much more inclusive. And that's, I think, more important and more substantive than just let's put more queer wrestlers in the ring.
Yeah, it has to come from both sides. It's like the fan community, right, has a responsibility to pay attention to like how we talk about wrestlers, the kind of wrestling that we support with our money and with our attention. But then the companies, I think AEW specifically with the what you were just describing, Eddie, those kinds of audience policies. That is a great example of something that just needs to be so much more widespread, not just for people with those specific needs, but also like general audience safety policies. What happens when I think, gaming conventions have been having this conversation for a while, and it's somewhere that I think wrestling companies really could step up and start having codes of conduct, not just for, oh, if anything goes wrong, we have your back, like with more actual specific, here's the kind of behavior that isn't tolerated, and here's what happens when that's violated. And that's for both audience to keep you like safe in a group of strangers, and also for performers, because there's, especially in like indie wrestling, there are all kinds of terrible things that happen backstage between performers that, me as like a fan on the internet, I see a Twitter thread at some point about someone, making their public statement, and I'm like, wow, how much stuff do I just not know about, because it's an insular community, and where could the wrestling companies themselves do better to make it like better for everyone, so everyone's more comfortable attending, performing. And I think that's where you get like good work, is when everyone there is like, feels like they have the safety to put out their best creative work.
Well put. Well said. I agree with everything that you said, and it's important. I think there's one company in particular that could probably do better for all of that.
Yeah.
Also, please wrestlers, unionize.
Please,
Right?
please unionize, wrestlers.
I know it's hard, but we would love it.
Yeah.
Be better for you, better for us.
Better for you.
But healthcare is important.
Healthcare is important.
Moving on, because we only got a little bit more time. I do want to talk about two things. The first thing is, tonight is WrestleMania. It is night one with an empty audience.
Stolen from TakeOver.
Stolen from TakeOver.
Not bitter.
TakeOver. My pay-per-view. What I look forward to on pay-per-view weekends for WWE is TakeOver.
Yep.
Same.
Yep.
So let's not talk about speculation, because you will have to have a round two of this panel, and I actually kind of want to, so maybe we can talk afterwards.
Time.
But everybody's doing the empty arenas, the good, bad, and the ugly. 3 points. What do you got? What's the good? What's the bad? What's the ugly?
I like the empty arenas personally. All right. So someone said, like, posted a tweet that was just like, man, that empty arena SmackDown just really hit different. And I was like, but how? So I decided to watch it for myself, and like, I've never had Sasha Banks or Bayley fall flat. And I've never had Bray Wyatt work for me. And both of those happened. And I was just like, I don't understand anything that's happening. This is so fascinating that, like, I know the crowd is a character in anything that you do, but the fact that it played so heavily for both of them, because Sasha and Bayley had no one to play off of. They didn't have anyone to like boo them or wish that they like go back to the way that they were. And Bray Wyatt finally had the space to be as uncomfortable as he actually is, and for it to actually work, because you had the silence that you needed for those moments to actually like feel right.
Yeah.
And John Cena feeling serious and not like some kind of overblown parody character. It was wild to me that, like, when you treated it more like theater, where you should be, there are points where you're quiet and there's points where you cheer. Like New Japan had the same, like I had the same reaction to it.
Yeah.
It was just so wild and different to me.
So you're looking forward to this, to WrestleMania then? 2 nights of a crowdless, very kind of stripped down or super honest kind of approach to pro wrestling.
I don't know if I'm looking forward to WrestleMania or to like the weekly stuff after, though.
Yeah.
Because like WrestleMania, what I watch for is the big like entrances and the theater and the pageantry.
Like imagine Royal Rumble empty. That's my feelings on it. Is like, imagine Royal Rumble empty and that Edge pop. When you heard the "You Think You Know Me," and everybody in the like surrounding area like lost their minds. But like, imagine that with WrestleMania. It's good. It like, because I get to use editing tricks, which has been working for AEW with like the Matt Hardy,
Yeah,
broken Matt Hardy.
my boy.
Able to teleport, the Bray Wyatt popping up behind John Cena while he's looking at the Fiend. It really lends into that character. I agree, though. The following Sasha Banks, who has never, in my opinion, like dropped a promo or anything like that, not having a crowd to work off of is really hurt some wrestlers. Some wrestlers have really gotten over, though, without a crowd because they're having to cut a promo directly to a television screen. They're
Yeah.
not getting interrupted. They're able to actually do their lines without having "you deserve it" or "you suck" or yelled at them. Like the Roman Reigns interview, that's the first time that Roman Reigns has ever gotten over for me. I've never liked Roman Reigns. He doesn't work for me. But that interview that he did, like he was talking honestly to the camera, and I was like, okay, yeah, no, I want this guy to win. Like,
Yeah, similar to me, like the Randy Orton and Edge match felt kind of thrown together to me for a long time. But when Edge had, like you said, like those quiet, intense moments that you can't do in a loud arena,
yeah,
you really start, okay, now I see what's happening here. And then Randy kind of trying to walk it back, but still him playing a sly, slinky predator again works well in a silent room.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I think it's odd because everyone's having to shift their dynamic. There are some people like Becky Lynch. I was the same way. It's like for a long time I thought she could do no wrong, but I realized she really needs that crowd behind her to really land.
Yeah.
And it's just not working for me right now because her gimmick is so based on the crowd reactions. So I mean, I honestly, I think there's pros and cons. We've talked a lot about them. I think the big ugly though is commentating has gone into the toilet.
Oh my
yeah.
god. Yeah, both ends
And
too.
all
promotions.
across the board, commentators don't know what to talk about when there's no crowd.
And it's awkward too. Like while at first I did kind of enjoy a little bit of the awkwardness, it got old very, very quickly. And this with AEW, with WWE, all of the crowdless rooms, these commentators don't know how to really play to that kind of room.
Right. I mean, a perfect example of this is a couple of weeks ago, I believe it was on SmackDown. There was some kind of big bump, and the WWE pacing is a really nasty bump happens. The commentators go quiet. You hear the crowd noise, and you get the moment of, oh my god, what just happens? It doesn't work if there's no crowd noise. It just sounds like the mic cut out. It worked. It was really awkward and very bad pacing.
I want to move into one more thing because that's a really good point. But I'm gonna let that one sit and simmer because you're preaching the choir here, and I'm sure everyone's yelling at their screens saying yes, God yes. I want to talk about tabletop gaming and wrestling and its influence on your lives, particularly from one individual on this panel. We are giving away a copy of Worldwide Wrestling. If you donate to the raffle during this stream, your name will be entered into the raffle. So if you're watching, please do that because Worldwide Wrestling is a fantastic game. But I want to talk about how your influence from wrestling into tabletop gaming inspired you to make this game.
So I mean, for me, it's a confluence, right, of being a wrestling fan. I was out of it for a while, came back into it kind of around the time that I was also simmering on some new game projects and whatnot. And for me, the insight that really led to how the game came together was that all the stuff that you do as a wrestling fan maps so well to all the stuff you do as a role player at the table. The idea of like, you have a character that has, stuff about them that is not the same as what your stuff is, right? So you have to represent it in some way. You might have an agenda for your character while the character themselves has a different agenda, right? Like I want to see my character get into trouble, so because that's fun. So they're going to say something dumb that clearly they would not say if they did not want to get into trouble, right?
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's that level, and then there's also the level where just as the consensual illusion at the table is that we're going to kind of pretend to be in conflict mediated through the rules to the greater joy of all, the consensual hallucination of wrestling is we're going to pretend to fight, even though we've already agreed how it's going to go. No one's actually going to get hurt, and it's going to be for the entertainment of everyone watching. And so those elements all just like meshed together so well once I really started kind of treating them as like, game design elements essentially. And I think time has shown that thankfully other people seem to be on that wavelength and get into it. Yeah, that's the short bit. I don't know what else in particular you might have wanted to.
I do want to
touch
know.
on.
I do want to know is will you come back and will you run a one shot for us for WWW?
We can talk. I'm always willing. It's all about the details. Depends on
Excellent.
what's going to be at that pay window. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I know exactly what you're saying. I know exactly. If you want to support WWW second edition, the Kickstarter is available. Actually, I'm going to post a link to it.
Everywhere that Kickstarters are sold.
Everywhere Kickstarters are sold. Worldwide Wrestling, dub. We will. I'll make sure to retweet it so that people can access it from there. I have a second question that I want to ask everybody. Will you come back and do another panel like this? Because I feel like an hour wasn't enough.
Agreed.
Yeah, we need another hour.
Yeah, totally.
Let's do it. Let's mark out again. The mic is now everybody's one by one. Cut a promo. Promote what you have going on. Let the world know where they can find you. Eddy.
You can find me and all the amazing material that I make at pugsteady.com, pugsteady.com. Also, Honest Path Publishing is where a lot of my work's coming from, including the upcoming Aberrant International Wrestling Entertainment product, where you can play superheroes literally inside of a wrestling ring.
Nice.
Yeah. Allie, what you got?
All right. We're going to slow it down a little bit. We're going to talk about how all of my games are really about marginalization, except for one. Really. But anyway, you can buy my games at madpierrot, that's madpierrot.itch.io, or madpierrot.design. That's my website. You can also look at my art there. It's very old. Yeah, we've got Misbehaving, Prohibition era gangsters trying to improve their neighborhoods. Awesome. We got Heist. If you like the Fast and the Furious, Gone in 60 Seconds, you want to play that in a one-shot, that's your game.
Nice.
Parliament of Supplements. I had the very bad idea of making a Kickstarter, and then I got work that paid more money, and I haven't gotten back to it yet. But we're going to go back to it. Sea of Legends. I'm going to be working on that. That Kickstarter is coming soon. It's a tabletop game with interactive elements on smart devices. And then there's some stuff from Paizo, some stuff from some other people. I can't talk about it yet, but it'll come soon.
And I've just decided that you probably never sleep because you are the busiest person on the internet doing all sorts of awesome things. And I'm
really
super
don't,
excited about all
but
these.
it's actually because I'm playing Apex Legends.
I appreciate the honesty. Grash, your turn. What do you got? Where can people find you? What do you have going on?
Again, my primary profession right now is I'm a professor and I'm teaching and I'm doing a lot of online work. But I'm still a developer, which unfortunately I have no projects to announce or talk about right now. But it's one of those. You don't find Grash will find you.
Love it. I love it. Just like the Dark Order. All right, Brother Wesley.
Hey yo. Let me tell you real quick. You can find me on Twitter right now. If you just go in your little tweet machine at Brother Wes, you're gonna find me right there on that Twitter machine. I talk to everybody. I'll talk to you about anything. You'll see me live tweeting WrestleMania, and I'm also streaming over at Gehenna Gaming's YouTube tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. Some alien RPG. Come see some people die in space, or maybe live. Who knows?
No, they're dying. They're
dying. Also, Carrion Comfort Studios is my Twitch. I stream every Saturday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. So come say hi to me. I'm always talking about horror. I'm talking about writing. I'm talking about wrestling. I'm talking about video games. Anything. Thank y'all. Out.
Great job. Nathan, what do you got? Where can people find you? What do you have going on?
Well, all of my work, everything you'd ever want to know is at ndpdesign.com, including links to the Kickstarter for Worldwide Wrestling 2nd Edition, as well as all of my other games, including of particular interest, perhaps, my Imp of the Perverse, which is an Edgar Allan Poe-inspired historical horror game where you play a protagonist with a little imp on your shoulder that you might physically turn into a monster if you give in too much to your dark desires. So just throwing that out there. You can find me, as they say, styling and profiling on Twitter at ND Paoletta, Instagram at the same handle, where you'll find pictures of my dog primarily. So check that out. And then I also have a Patreon to support all of my design efforts, as I am a full-time independent designer, patreon.com/ND Paoletta. And if you, like me and my friend Epadiah Ravachol, are into the greatest television detective series of all time, The Rockford Files, we have a podcast about that show at 200aday.fireside.fm. So
I'm
check that
currently subscribing right now.
The only thing I have to promote is Virtual Horror Con, which is what you are watching right now. All donations directly, if you click on the donate button, please do. All the raffle tickets go, and the game tickets go to the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for donating. I've got nothing else to add. That's the bottom line. Thank you so much, everybody.
Watch more wrestling. Support indie wrestling.
Support indie wrestling. Go watch wrestling live.
Support indie wrestling.
Wait, not yet. That was a bad. Oh, don't watch when we're ready to go. When we're ready to go in public, then you can watch live.
Yeah.
All right.
Not right now, but when it gets ready.